Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Collin Stewart. I'm your host today. And on the episode coming up, we're talking to Ruben Dua. He's a podcast host, a video enthusiast, a demand gen marketer, and founder CEO of dub.com. We're talking about where we had a really good conversation about how to lean into your personality and attract your best customers. Really, this episode came down to I was trying to take on the role of a new SDR and asking Ruben questions about how can I be more authentic and how do I get past those walls or those layers that kind of sit in between your real personality and whatever shows up at the end on the phone when you're calling a prospect. So that's what you're going to get out of this episode. Coming up next, we're gonna roll that for you. You may have noticed that we're doing the intro a little bit different. I'm back on the show full time now, and I wanted to change things up. So we're gonna do a new intro format, which also means we've got a new ad roll format. As you know, we don't have sponsors on the show other than Predictable Revenue, and this episode is brought to you by our Pods team. I don't really have an ad roll for this, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the Pods team is. I think we're renaming it actually. Basically, it's a sales development rep. If you're thinking about building an SDR team, there are really two paths. You can build it yourself, or you can have somebody build a team for you. The challenge with building it yourself is there's all these fractional people that you need. And the advantage of having an outsourced team do it for you is we have all those fractional people, whether it's an email deliverability person, an SDR coach, and a sales enablement person, a revenue ops person, a data person, all of these different people. Having 6 different support people for 2 SDRs really doesn't make sense. So come let us be your sort of fractional resources for you. That being said, predictable revenue / pods, go to predictablerevenue.com, click on that sales development pods button if you want to find out more, or hit me up on LinkedIn, Collin Stewart. With that being said, thanks for listening. On to the episode. And let me know on LinkedIn what you think of the new podcast format. Thanks. I'm excited to have you on. And one thing we were talking about just before we got started here was talking about how to be free. And that's a really interesting question I want to set you up with. I want to add a bit of context. I'm going to assume the role of a new SDR in this, fresh out of college, and we're going to talk about how do I figure this out to be free. I think it's easy for me to, as a CEO, to sit here and go, oh yeah, all this makes sense because I've got the title. I've been doing this. I've been in sales for 20 years. So it's a whole lot easier for me to kind of sit here and accept these things. But I remember the fear of being new and being on the phone and feeling like I had to put on my phone voice and feeling like I had to put on all these layers around me as like protection. And so with that being said, I'd love for you to talk to us about how, as salespeople, as SDRs, as people that are trying to attract customers, trying to create real connections and conversations, talk to me about how we can be free.
Well, there's this idea that the ultimate path to connecting with people in sales is through creativity and personalization. And this just means, how can we gather their attention? How can we capture their interest? Maybe that's creativity. And then how can we convey information so that they feel like what we're telling to them is done in a personalized way? Our product or service is applied and it's relevant for them. And that's why they potentially want to talk to us and hopefully buy from us. So creativity and personalization, those are the keys to being amazing in sales. Now, it's really hard to do that when you start to talk about scale and you start to talk about bureaucracy, you start to talk about dogma, you start to talk about scripts, templates. On this spectrum that we look at, on the left side, it's I can do whatever I want. I'm a solopreneur. I can take risks. I can do interesting things and be a little bit silly. And then on the opposite side, you're an SDR. You're a new SDR that's working for a large organization. And there's rules and regulations and a boss and ideas of what's right and what's not right. And typically what happens, at least in a good organization, is that there's structure, there's a framework. Welcome welcome. You're a new SDR on the team. Welcome. Here is your pack. And that pack contains how to say it, what to say, when to say it, why to say it, where to say it. It's got everything, right? So now the challenge becomes, how do we become creative and personalized within a structure, within the dogma, within the constraints and the confines of whatever situation we find ourselves in? And that ultimately is the hardest thing to do. But once we can find that, which is, in my opinion, being free, is when we ultimately will get the promotion, we'll close the deal, we'll laterally jump, we'll internally jump, however you define success, that will occur. And the idea here of being free is saying, I am not afraid to live within the constraints, not break the rules, but still make it my own, make it creative, and make it personalized.
Before we jump into how can we be free, I feel like as a new SDR within the confines, there's also the fear, right? It's not just the external kind of layers that get added in of you got to say this and you have to do this and you got to explain the product this way. Those are the kind of external layers that you got to get through. But I think there's those internal layers of like, I'm a new SDR. I've got to follow the book. I've got to be like this. There's all these kind of assumptions and biases, at least I had, about when I was on the phone and the things I felt like I could and could not say. Like I've always been a fairly silly person, but it took me a long time to build that into my cold calling a little bit. And not that I'm getting on the phone and telling knock knock jokes, but I would love it if that worked. That would be incredible. It probably doesn't, but I hope somebody tests it out. So how do we get through those kind of internal layers? Maybe we start there and then we get into, how do we create it? Because I think to your point, you got to get through all of those layers.
Right. Well, I think the first thing is that understanding that the reason why we have the layers the way that they exist is because someone has tested this. Someone has tried that script out. They've picked up the phone, they've sent the email, they've sent the LinkedIn message, and some response came to them. And then as a result of that, there's some definition of success. Now, if we're a creative person that wants to go and try to break that, change it, do something different, we can't just start to do that, because we will be a rebel and we will break the rules. And it doesn't matter if we're the smartest guy in the room, because ultimately no one's going to want to work with us because we just can't follow the rules. And that's not where we want to be. So I think the key is really diving deep into whatever it is that you're doing and truly making it your own. If someone reads a script in a really monotone way without any personality, and they're not really bringing, frankly, any of their personality to the table, it's probably not going to work. The person on the other side is going to sense that this person is not in it. They're not present. They're not excited. They're not passionate about this. So the second that we take a mediocre script and add our passion, our personalization, our persona, sometimes our persistence, all of a sudden, the world opens up to us. So I think the first thing is about really truly making it your own and not being disgruntled about having to use someone else's work, because it's sort of sparing you the experimentation time, because chances are it's there because it has worked at some point.
So how do we get to a place where we're comfortable doing that?
I think it's repetition. I think that there is some beauty that happens when you get to a point where you've repeated something so many times that every time, for the first 1,000 times, you've noticed some incremental improvement. And by definition, it's actually not repetition, because every time it's a little bit different and hopefully a little bit better. At least on an average, it's better. It doesn't need to be better every single time. There's ups and downs. But overall, you will be improving. The other day I was at this Chinese restaurant, Chin Chin's, and the waiter came to the table and, he asked us, he says, so what would you guys like to order? And then we're just looking at the menu. We hadn't even looked at the menu yet. So, that's an old one. The waiter comes to the table and you finally pick up the menu saying, I'm ready to order. So we start to look at the order, and within a second, he knew that we were not ready to order. And what he said was, you guys take some time. I'll come back. And the way he said it, it was as if he had done that 1,000 times, because he probably has said, you guys take your time. I'll come right back. And the way I was laughing about this with my wife, because the way that he said it, you could tell he was experienced with that. He knew that his time is valuable, that we were not remotely close to being ready to order from the menu. So he was, making us feel good, being actually compassionate, empathetic. And I think that's just an example of a script that he's repeated 1,000 times, where he found the nuance in it. And I felt that, and I connected to that, and I smiled, and I said, great, we'll see you in a couple of minutes. And then of course we were prepared afterwards once he arrived. But I think the point here is, repetition brings the beauty in it. And that's what essentially is going to get us to the point where we can actually start to enjoy it. The final comment that I'll make here is that if we are not enjoying what we are doing, people will smell it from a million miles away. It smells like death. If you've ever smelt that death plant, that comes like once, it like blooms like once a year or something, and it's putrid. It's just terrible smelling. At Huntington Park, we go and we see it because it's so interesting. You can smell it a mile away. And that is the same thing in sales. If you are an SDR, if you are a VP of sales, if you are a CEO, does not matter. A podcaster, does not matter who you are. If you are not feeling passionate, if you are not interested in what you're doing, and you're not frankly happy, people will smell it from a million miles away.
The corpse flower, that's the thing you're talking about, right?
That's it. It's the corpse flower.
I've never seen it in person. It looks just wild.
It's crazy. It smells just wild too.
Yeah, and you're right. It is the most obvious thing. And I think, to your point, there's an element of I'm comfortable in this. I'm comfortable with this script. I think the other element is like I'm comfortable in this role, in this position. I've accepted it. I've adjusted to it. I'm sitting here, and there's like a firmness to it, as opposed to, I think in the past, and I think it's easy to feel this way as a SDR in your first 90-day probationary period. By definition, your time feels temporary, right? If I don't hit my call quotas, if I don't hit my meeting targets, this is all very temporary, and it's hard to come across as permanent and solid on a call when the reason why you're there is tenuous at best.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to talk a little bit about how do we get onto this path of like, I guess solidifying, that feeling of being able to be yourself in the sales and prospecting, kind of regardless of what industry you're in.
I somehow was reminded of Ben and Jerry's, the ice cream company that was acquired for just an insane amount of money. And now it's a franchise. I recently went to one. And, I was doing a little bit of research on the founders, Ben and Jerry. And, their process building up the company was a sort of true organic sort of grassroots type founding. And, they were making ice cream. They were mixing the milk and the sugar, and they were doing the process, and they did it so many times that they became masters at it. And what they realized was that, yes, people want ice cream, but people also want clever titles, clever ingredients, stories behind them, interesting colors. And I think for the SDR, I think that this is sort of my public service announcement, but if you feel like you are in a situation where you're better than it, because I know this, because I felt like this so much of my life. I am better than the situation that I am in. I should not have this job. I should have that guy's job. I should not have this salary. I should have that person's salary. You're missing something. You're missing the essence of what Ben and Jerry went through in their founding story, which is to figure out the perfect way to make ice cream. And they did not make a lot of money. They were grossly underpaid for years and years and years, until they realized that they were sitting on something really big. And then they, of course, made some great choices, got very lucky, super creative. And then, here we are with Ben and Jerry's, so I think the takeaway that I'm trying to say here is that if you find your joy in the process, if you make it your own, if you truly be present in what you're doing, then you are going to get where you want to be. You're going to get that job. You're going to get that salary. You're going to get that deal. You're going to get that title. It's all going to come to you, but you can't sit there in your chair disgruntled saying, I'm too good for this, because that's just going to end up worse.
Yeah, I've certainly been there looking at the CEO as I'm a junior level marketing coordinator and be like, I could do their job.
Yeah.
I've also been in other roles. Honestly, I remember where I was. I was wrong. I was most definitely wrong. I wanted that job, but I was absolutely unequivocally wrong. I've also been in higher level roles or on phone calls with, prospects or possible customers, or, actual customers. I'm like, I don't feel qualified to be on this call at all. Like, what am I doing here? I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how do I figure out if I'm a new SDR, a new AE, how do I figure out, what it is that I'm struggling with, that's getting in my way to, getting to this promised land of being free?
Well, I think a lot of it really comes down to listening. I think that listening is probably one of the most underutilized, next to writing. Listening is one of the most underutilized skills and activities, frankly, in sales. And I think the reason why this is the case is because salespeople are, number one, we are mostly extroverts in nature. Some of us are hybrid introverts, extroverts, and there are some that are introverts pretending to be extroverts. That's kind of me most of the time. But the point here, though, is that when you are listening, you are actually able to show the person that you're connecting to them. And by listening, you're learning. Because if we keep repeating our same sales pitch, I mean, imagine an SDR that has a job where they just go in and they just start saying, here's our features. And they repeat that over and over and over again. Okay. So let's just diagnose that for 1 second here. Okay. Number one, that's boring as heck. Okay. No one wants to go and repeat the same sales pitch over and over and over again. Number two is you're not learning, you're not listening, you're not seeing what the target client's problems truly are so that you can address them. Number three is you're not showing, empathy or compassion or the fact that I want to personalize my pitch, be creative so that I can help you solve your problems, and not to mention it's not good for your mental health. There's a whole nother long list that I can add to the problem of just repeating your sales pitch over and over as opposed to listening. But the most important thing is that you're evolving as a person. You're saying, how do I become happy with the things that I'm unhappy about? How do I accomplish the goals that I want to accomplish? How do I get better at my weaknesses? How do I improve my own strengths? So I think truly being present and listening, I think is really where the most growth can take place. Socrates and actually Confucius said it best. They said, the wise man is quiet, the dumb man, the fool, talks a lot.
I want to follow that up with some silence.
That's important.
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to talk more.
Well, this is a podcast. That might be a problem. This is sort of this is your role. If you do all, if I have to do all the talking, this episode's not going to go very well.
It's the world's first listening podcast.
Yeah, it's like ASMR for silence.
Right.
You said something earlier there, kind of in the intro. We were talking about creativity, personalization, and honesty. And I think the biggest thing that you kind of mentioned there was relevance. To your last point there, if you have somebody's attention, it is a gift. And if you have not put your research in or kind of done the work to understand what's relevant, what's going to be important to them, even just by listening on that call, you're really doing yourself and themselves a disservice. What are your thoughts on how do we get to that, understanding that point of relevance? Because not everybody's just going to sit there and tell you these are the things that are most relevant, right? Sometimes you got to dig.
Yeah. Well, someone once told me something, and I'll never forget this because I always try to do it. So I just like most people, I'm a visual learner and I'm a visual communicator, which is why we love video and why we built what we build at Dub. And if you can draw your business, if you can draw your customer's business from A to Z, the whole thing, you have a black belt. You truly understand the whole ecosystem of what it looks like from their perspective and also what your perspective is. And then the key is, of course, finding that alignment between your ecosystem and their ecosystem. And that's where the sale and the revenue and relationship takes place. But most people, if you were to ask them, can you draw your business? Most of the people cannot. They can draw their department or their role, but they can't draw their entire business. So if you're in sales and you can't draw your entire business, you don't know what it's going to look like when the client gets onboarded, or when the client is served as an account, or when the client is having issues, problems, customer service issues, or when the client wants to churn, or when the client wants to do the opposite, which is refer someone. You don't have clarity of what that looks like. And then the same thing applies to their business. What truly are you selling? Why are you selling it? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Like, what is it? If I have a widget here, if this is the widget that I'm selling, this little porcelain house, if I don't understand why my customer wants this and what problem it's truly solving, how can I ultimately sell this? And how can I enjoy selling this? And how can I go to bed at night knowing that when I sell this widget to someone, it completely changes their world and they make money, they save money, they get happy, whatever the case may be, it brings them that satisfaction. So how important is it that we can A, draw our business, and B, draw their business, the customers? And the way, of course, this all happens is through listening. And listening is not just my ears are open when someone else is talking. It's listening to podcasts like yours. It's reading books. It's going onto YouTube and doing the 6-hour marathon on YouTube, which everyone should do, at least once a quarter, where you want to learn how to do something and you go spend 6 hours on YouTube and you watch every video ever made on that topic. And you come out the other end after the weekend, you're like, wow, I actually know how to do that now. I'm not bad at that. I went through the process. That's listening. So draw your business and draw their business. And then all of a sudden you will have a much better perspective. And then as a junior marketing associate, maybe one day you can have that CEO job. Maybe it's your own company, or maybe it's a lateral jump, or maybe, you grow within your own organization. It is all possible, but you must have perspective.
Totally. First step is automating your job with a macro that you copy and pasted from the internet. And then that's how you free up your time so you can start making cold calls for the sales guy across the hall.
Exactly. Delegating 80% of your work is 100% awesome. I think I heard that on a Dan Martell YouTube video. So
right on. I love Dan.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to the sort of new SDR lens, we were talking about the ultimate goal is how do we be free? How do we be authentic and in our prospecting and our sales? Part of the journey we talked about before was figuring out, kind of starting with figuring out what your strengths and your areas for opportunity are. Can you tell me about, your process and some of the things? I know you've had an interesting journey there. Can you maybe shed some light on how and where people might want to poke around for stuff like that?
So that's really sort of what I think what we're talking about is it self-awareness? Is it understanding our strengths and weaknesses? Or okay.
Sure.
So I think that what I love about this topic, which is like self-realization, is that we're all students of this. We're all on this journey. I'm learning things about myself every single day. I learn mostly from my amygdala hijacks. When my amygdala is hijacked, that's when I learn about what I'm afraid of, whether it's, safety of my kids, or whether it's growth for the business, or whether it's losing a client. There's defensiveness, there's humor, there's jokes, there's, anger, there's the clench of the fist, there's some, reaction. And that's basically your mind feeling something, right? And a lot of the times we try to shake it off, or we try to laugh it off, or just pretend like it was nothing. But really, ultimately, those are our fears, right? And if we don't address those fears in our conscious state, we are going to address those in our subconscious state when we're dreaming. And we're going to have a dream where there's a fiery dragon and we're getting pushed off of a cliff, and there's only one way to go. And that is probably a terrible job, or a recession, or whatever it is, some metaphor, right? The fiery dragon is a metaphor for whatever you're truly, most worried about in your life. And I think, this idea of self-realization, self-awareness, I think that comes from pushing yourself and actually being uncomfortable, moving yourself out of the complacency. Most people would rather be in a coffin than the person giving the eulogy. That is a known fact. Public speaking is a terrifying thing for most people. In fact, it was for me, and I still feel it. I get the heebie-jeebies before I go on a stage, and I have to breathe, and I have to go through the process. And but it feels good once I overcome it and I'm able to communicate and share a story. And I think that, putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, I think is really where that starts, because that's where we start to expand ourselves. If you're a guitarist, jump on a piano. If you have an acoustic guitar, grab an electric guitar. Continue to expand that horizon, because then you get that larger sort of perspective of things. And then you figure out what your strengths and your weaknesses are. some people have an innate abilities to do things better than others. It's sort of just a random thing, nature, nurture, who knows what it is. It's not really relevant, and other people have to work on things. So as you start to sort of experiment and try things and become self-aware and go to that conference, get on that stage, get on that podcast, start something, start your YouTube channel, write that song, write your book, put the ink to the paper in whatever way it means to you. That is going to allow you to become more self-aware. And frankly, it's going to build personality. I mean, this is what Ernest Hemingway, would always write about, which is the idea of a hero going on a journey, and that hero going on an arc. And we start in this current place, and then we get some catalyst, we meet someone educates us, something happens to us, we get some sort of a fall. And then all of a sudden we become realized, we find the way, we find the direction, we feel compassion, someone guides us there, or frankly, we guide ourselves there. And then we get to a different state, a post state, and that's the beauty of the story arc. And we're all a story arc within a story arc within a story arc. If you look at our, progress, hopefully this upward trajectory, that just looks like a sawtooth,
Mm-hmm.
So I think self-awareness it really comes down to experimenting, getting outside your comfort zone, and just losing yourself in something. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, he says, lose yourself in something. If you're curious about how to be the best SDR in the planet, lose yourself to it. Go on the journey of listening to everything you possibly can, experimenting everything you possibly can to figure out what your strengths or weaknesses are, and then focus on both of those. And then the macro automation helps too.
Mm-hmm. I remember, and I'm going to poke you on macro automation next year, because I want to understand where you're going there. The feeling I remember was the staring at the phone, and I'm old enough that I had to look at an old Mindronics, maybe desk phone or something like that, where I had to pick it up and actually dial with my fingers. I'm not quite old enough that it was like a rotary or like sending Morse code. But right. I did have a big old phone book in front of me, and I did have to, pick it up and throw the headset on and make my dials. It felt like this big old emotional wall of like hot lead in your stomach when you're like, I don't want to make these calls. And when you're sitting there right in front of it, it feels like this giant 40-foot wall that you're never going to be able to scale. And then I remember, getting over it for the first time, and like, man, what a joyous occasion that was. And this thing that seemed like a 40-foot wall made out of barbs and fire and all the terrible things that, you don't want to go near, suddenly seems like a speed bump that, yes, you still see there still is a little bit of that fear. There still is some barbed wire, but if you go fast enough over it, you hardly even notice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not advocating for speeding over speed bumps.
Mm-hmm.
That would wreck your car, probably hurt people. But I think with these like mental obstacles of, I'm staring at the phone, I got to make my 60, 100, 400 calls a day if you're plugged into something crazy. There is that fear. And I think I just wanted to share for any SDRs that are new, that are listening, that never goes away, but it becomes dramatically reduced. Whether it's the phone, whether you're in discovery, whether it's that first moment on a cold call where you're connecting and you're like, I hope my voice doesn't squeak. I hope I don't say the wrong name.
I hope I don't ask how they're doing on a cold call.
Yeah. Have I caught you at the wrong time? No, what was I supposed to say? If you forget your script, it's fine. You'll make another 78 calls that day, and it'll be fine. And this thing that seems so big will eventually seem just like a unimportant little speed bump.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, your perception there, similar experience. And then we should talk about the macro, as you described it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what an interesting concept. I'll start with this. The majority of Fortune 500 CEOs come from sales backgrounds. I will repeat, the majority of Fortune 500 CEOs have sales backgrounds. Okay. So for anyone that's in sales in any capacity listening to this, remember that you now have the job that can set you up for a Fortune 500 CEO job. I don't know if you want that job. That's probably a lot of stress, but it is some significant marker of success, being a Fortune 500 CEO, which I have never been, so I don't know what that feels like. But sales and going through the sales process of doing those 78 calls, it builds something within yourself. It builds a certain perseverance, a certain ability to feel a sense of accomplishment, a certain sense of actually having very limited amount of time and communicating something very important, and then ultimately convincing someone, inspiring someone, motivating someone to actually take a leap of faith to overcome the hardest hurdle in business, which is the trust hurdle. If you can learn all of those things through doing your 78 calls every single day, you are set up for a situation where you're building your emotional quotient. A lot of people have high intelligence quotient, and those people are who they are. Some salespeople have very high IQs, some people don't. It really doesn't matter what your IQ is in sales. But your emotional quotient, on the other hand, that comes from experience. That comes from, frankly, talking to strangers. So the importance of going through that process is ultimately going to potentially set you up for that ultimate job that you want. And that could be CEO of your own company, founder, it could be podcaster, it could be artist, whatever it is, going through this process, I think, is really going to set you up. So don't give up. I promise there is a rainbow. There's a pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. I promise.
I love it. I want to, part of me is tempted to detour because I just had the question jumped into my mind. I've always heard the most Fortune 500 CEOs come from sales. And then I was thinking about like those companies. I'm like, but wouldn't a very large portion of their employee base be in sales?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As well.
10% is typical on a large company like that. How many people are in sales? Could go up to 20% if it's more of a customer service driven situation. But yeah, I mean, maybe 30% if it's a mega sales organization. I mean, for a real estate company or for something like that where it's all sales driven, that's obviously the majority. But yeah, a lot of it is just you're in probably one of the largest departments. So I mean, just by the sheer volume, you have a chance of getting there. But I think it really comes down to the ability to communicate. That's the hardest thing. Good leaders are good listeners. Good leaders are good communicators. Good leaders are good inspirers. Good leaders are people who frankly don't give up, and put other people in front of them.
100%. I did a quick Google and it looks like Cisco about 25% to
Nice.
20 to 25%.
Yeah. In sales, that makes total sense. With those enterprise deals that they get, frankly, selling to other Fortune 500 companies, makes total sense. Yeah.
100%. I wanted to land the episode. We had talked in the pre-interview about sort of creating a framework for success, and how do we make this repeatable and scalable? I know a big part of that's repetition. I'm curious, your thoughts on some of the things we've talked about, from kind of discovering how to be your, true, honest, authentic self, to like getting to that place to be radically honest, to finding your strengths and opportunities. What are your thoughts on how do we build this all into a framework for success?
Well, I think that, just to circle back to fear and to understanding fear, I think that it's as sales and marketing professionals, I think it's really important to understand this simple truth. And this is conjecture. This is my opinion. You don't have to agree with this, but this is simply my opinion. So, ultimately, all cold sales messages are going to get blocked, right? Emails already get put into a promo or a spam folder. Okay. It's really hard to get your emails at scale in campaigns delivered to someone's inbox right at the top where, it's all peachy and perfect and all the images appear. It's really hard to do that. It's nearly impossible. Okay. Most of the time it goes into another folder, and then you have to display images, and, all sorts of stuff is required just to protect consumers. Google and, Earthlink and AOL and Mac Mail and Outlook, Microsoft, all these companies are trying to figure out how to protect our privacy and how to, protect inundation by data, noise overload. And a lot of that is emails. LinkedIn messages, what do we do with them? Most of them we ignore, right? How many of your LinkedIn messages have you responded to? I don't know. Is it 10%, 5%?
Yeah, I couldn't even guess. I get so many, and they're all so clearly automation at this stage.
Right. Yeah. Text messages. Text messages is still open, actually. There's not, I think on Android devices, there is some sort of a promo folder on some version of Android, but on iPhone, if you send someone an SMS, it's just going to go into the same folder. And I know this because, at Dub, we're actually building this two-way SMS feature, and we're getting ready to launch it. And it's amazing because you can broadcast an SMS message to 10,000 people, and it goes right in their inbox. So we have to make sure that people are being very responsible with this technology. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that, leaning into this fear that ultimately all our messages are going to get blocked as sales professionals, it inspires us to figure out how we can become more scalable and more repeatable, how we can overcome the idea of eventually that we are going to be in a blocked environment. And I think the solution is actually to do, Collin, exactly what you do, which is to start a podcast, to, wire up your social channels, to get your personality out there, to understand the simple fact that we're building personas, we're building these characters. I am a persona, I'm a character. You can go to YouTube and you can type my name, or you can type Rev Show and you can find me, and that's my thing. And I've effectively cloned myself. So I can kick back at home and be comfortable, and then you can go watch, the content that I've created, or your amazing podcasts. Just, hopefully just like this one, people can go consume that content. In fact, millions of people can consume that. So for the SDR listening out there, get yourself ready to become a creator if you're not one already. Pick up your phone. It's a production studio. It's right in your pocket. You can do anything you want on it. Video, audio, it's the sky is the limit. It's just about starting and beginning, because ultimately your messages will get blocked and people will have to find you on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and, Twitter and whatever else, whatever the new thing is, in the future. So just keep that in mind, create, and that ultimately is what's going to connect and finally convert.
I love it. Ruben, thank you so much for coming on the show. I do want to land with an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Dub, because I know we wanted to talk about, I know you're working on some things in the video and sales world. We've tried doing video. I've tried doing cold text, and the cold text and the top two best in terms of response rate campaigns I ever did was cold text and cold email, cold calendar invite. Actually, they both had 100% response rate. The response was exceptionally negative, but I've never done anything else that had 100% response rate. I heard you talking about text messaging and video and sales, and I'm thinking, how are you doing this differently so that I'm not going to get blown up, or that when PD, our AE or SDR at the time, tries to do this, people are calling me being like, this jerk sent me a cold text message.
Exactly. This is something that we're thinking about. This is why actually we haven't launched it yet, because we're trying to figure out, it's that scene in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So we have to put SMS campaigns and automation is out there. You can go get a platform. It's not cheap, but the tech is out there. We're just trying to figure out how to make it more personalized and more creative and more honest and authentic ultimately, so that people get the goal that they want to get. But we have to do it, of course, in a very responsible way.
Of course. Love to wrap by just telling me a little bit about Dub and the podcast and where people can find you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for doing what you do, because you're amazing at what you do, and I really feel a lot of gratitude to be within your sphere now. I think that Dub it's a video sales platform. You can record videos from your screen, from your phone, from your webcam. You can send those over email, LinkedIn, Gmail, SMS, automated campaigns and workflows. And ultimately what you're going to do is you're going to allow people to see you and to connect with you and learn from you visually, and then eventually hopefully convert to be a client. And grab a free account at we'll set up a link, dub.com/Collin with two L's. Collin with two L's. So we'll set up that link and encourage you guys to check it out. My podcast is called Connection Loop, and Collin, I cannot wait to have you as a guest on it.
Yeah, I think we've got that booked in a couple of weeks, don't we?
Done and done.
Right on. Well, Ruben, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great having you, and I'm looking forward to being on your show. And I'm sure we'll if you're following the podcast, we'll make sure we throw a shout out there when I show up on Rubens in case you want to, for whatever reason, listen to me blather on about nothing.
Nice. Thank you so much. Yeah. The takeaways are keep it creative, keep it personalized. Don't forget to repeat yourself. Don't forget to listen. Don't forget to ultimately feel a connection with what you're doing. Get visualizations of your business, of their business, and ultimately pay your dues, because there is a pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. I promise you.
Love it, Ruben. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks everybody listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.